St. Paul's Catacombs, the largest catacomb complex in Malta. The Gigantea temples in Gozo, considered as the oldest freestanding building in the world. The Tarshian megalithic temples adorned with unique ornamentation. 3 sites, 2 of them considered as World Heritage Sites, 1 single project, the Archaeological Heritage Conservation Project. Heritage Malta is the national agency responsible for the cultural heritage and for rendering the cultural assets entrusted to it accessible. This is why in 2009 the agency lodged an application to secure European funding to execute this project.
These sites were identified after a detailed study. Our priority, as the national agency responsible for cultural heritage, is obviously to conserve, and hence, at the St. Paul's Catacombs, in Gigantea and the Tarshian temples, the conservation of the site was a central focus throughout the project. On the other hand, rendering cultural assets accessible is as important as conserving the sites. Hence, these projects rendered these sites accessible both physically and intellectually.
However, before the planning and implementation of a project on an archaeological or historically sensitive site may start, this must first be preceded by an understanding of the cultural significance of the sites or those elements and values that make them unique.
The St. Paul Catacomb complex is a significantly important site for Malta, as it is the largest surviving Roman burial site just outside of the ancient city of Malta. It was originally part of a much larger cemetery that eventually shrank and later divided into separate and differently named plots of land.
it-tempji ta' Tarshian huma meqjusa bħala wirt dinji.
The Tarshian temples are considered as World Heritage, which means that we not only safeguard them as part of our national heritage, but also on behalf of the international community. But apart from this, the Tarshian temples are particular in that they are comprised of an extensive complex which was excavated more recently than other prehistoric temples, and was therefore excavated in a scientific manner.
Mill-tempji l-oħrajn u anki ġie skavat b'mod xjentifiku.
Tempji tal-Gigantea f'Għawdex għandhom valur.
The Gigantea temples in Gozo are recognized as sites of great cultural and historic significance. The remains of this site are the tangible evidence of an organized community, which, despite the limited resources available on the island, succeeded in the most impressive of ways to create an architectural concept which is unique in the world. This is our legacy, left to us by the first inhabitants of Gozo, a legacy declared by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site, a legacy which is now experienced and enjoyed by thousands of visitors each year.
Li ta' kull sena jiġu jżuru dan is-sit.
Restoration and conservation intervention projects are based on established principles and ethics found in international charters published by recognized institutions like ICOMOS and UNESCO. Amongst these principles are those of the reversibility of any intervention to an absolute minimum, so as to ensure the conservation of as much as possible of the original and authentic, and reserve interventions solely to those adverse aspects that create direct damage to the site, so as to slow down where possible the deterioration rate. This is why a conservation project must commence with the preparation of a number of technical studies, also known as documentation, which forms the basis of any subsequent decision-making from conservation aspects to design theories. When a site is to be rendered accessible to the public, this in itself is a greater challenge.
Every individual visiting our sites unwillingly leaves some impact on them. Therefore, one of the studies that we carried out to prepare for this project was a Limits of Acceptable Change survey. In this study, we tried to identify beforehand what these changes are, so that we will be able to manage them better. In this study, we also met and had discussions with a lot of people, for example, tour guides and other stakeholders, so that we would also get their views on what they would like to see in our sites.
For a doctor to diagnose a patient's illness and to decide upon the cure to be prescribed, the patient must firstly be examined. The same applies in conservation. First, the condition report documentation for the state of the site is done, leading to the identification of the issues. This documentation process utilizes all possible methodologies, utilizing the latest technologies available.
Wieħed mill-proċessi ta' studju ta' dan il-proġett kien ovvjament.
One of the main research processes of this project involved the documentation of the 3 sites to create a concise document with the sites, plans and all the required measures. These are sites that have been excavated decades ago and were missing good documentation, which was made available by today's modern techniques and technologies. For example, the 24 catacombs of St. Paul's complex were never planned and surveyed into one plan together to show their location within one site. A long process of surveying to create plans and elevations in the 3 sites was done not only to provide a physical plan of the site, but also to provide a platform for other studies, like for example, to map damages and deterioration. Other processes of documentation using diverse technologies were, however, also carried out at the same time. These included techniques like laser scanning that scanned the surface and the sites to create a 3D model and a GPR, radar that penetrates the ground and identifies the differences between solid and stones, thus enabling the identification of burial sites and areas of interest, and further helped in the documentation of the site.
Skavati u jgħinna ukoll fil-proġett ta' dokumentazzjoni tas-sit tiegħek.
Mela, fost l-istudju li saru fuq is-siti kien hemm l-istudju fuq l-impatt ambjentali u bioloġiku fuq il-materjal.
The preliminary studies on the sites included the environmental and biological impact on the fabric. At both the St. Paul Catacombs and Tarshin temples, a biological mapping exercise was undertaken, whereby all the organic growth on the surfaces as well as vegetation were recorded and their impact on the historic fabric analysed. In Tarshin, this will also enable us to compare the situation before and after the construction of the shelter.
Kif namlu comparison ta' x'qed jiġri kemm qabel u x'ħajjiġri issa wara li x-shelter tkun f'posta għal numru ta' snin. Għall-istess raġuni saret ukoll l-istudju.
For the same reasons, the environmental study was required to understand the effects of the wind, sun, UV and humidity. Towards this end, weather stations were installed at both the St. Paul Catacombs and Tarshin temples, and environmental monitoring equipment inside the sites themselves helped to understand the effect the environment is having on the deterioration of the site and how these effects can be better mitigated.
Biex nistudjaw u nsibu mod kif nippreservawhom aħjar.
Inħass il-bżonn li niċċekkjaw daqsxejn is-sitwazzjoni eżistenti tal.
The need was felt to check out the existing situation at the Gigantea temples as well as at St. Paul's Catacombs, so as to see their structural condition to date. Structural analysis was performed before deciding on the type of interventions they required.
Qabel ma niddeċidu x'tip ta' interventi ikun hemm bżonn nagħmlu fihom.
In these sites, where some form of infrastructure works are required, the process also involves archaeological excavations so as to identify the permissible areas for constructing new foundations.
F'kull intervent infrastrutturali li jsir fuq sit arkeoloġiku partikolarment.
In every infrastructural intervention on an archaeological site, especially sites as important as these, we take into consideration the results of desktop research, as well as GPR and other forms of research, and then start archaeological investigations so as to verify the information gathered. Basically, the research continues through manual excavation, and this physically confirms the information we have gathered by other means.
Fl-art stess xem biex nikkonfermaw daw ir-riżultati.
3 very important sites. 2 World Heritage Sites. Studies, documentation, archaeology, striking the balance between conservation and accessibility. The Archaeological Heritage Conservation Project continues. The Archaeological Heritage Conservation Project, the balance between conservation and accessibility, to offer a new experience to the visitor, a unique experience. In October 2009, Heritage Malta launched an international design competition for the Gigantia Temples Archaeological Park in Gozo. This included the infrastructure design and all necessary services for future visitors. A design brief had been prepared to identify the parameters that any proposal had to meet in order to improve the experience of visitors to the site.
Id-design brief li ħareġ għal kompetizzjoni tad-disinn ġewwa l-Ġgantija kien jinkluda parameters.
The published design brief for the Gigantia Heritage Park specified those design parameters to ensure a unique experience when visiting the oldest freestanding structure in the world. The master plan included an interpretation centre situated around 200 meters away from the temples, country lanes and landscaping linking the interpretation centre to the temple plaza, and a small building including basic amenities before exiting the site. This all had to be done in an authentic way, respecting the site and being reversible.
Dak kollu li huwa awtentiku u preistoriku ġewwa dan il-pajsaġġ.
For this call for applications, Heritage Malta received 12 design proposals, 2 of which were presented by a consortium formed by local and foreign firms, whilst the other 2 were from international architectural firms. All proposals were displayed to the public in 2 exhibitions organised in Malta and Gozo. This competition was won by a firm of Maltese architects, DTR. Furthermore, the jury decided to award an honourable mention to 2 other project submissions, one by TBA Periti, as well as the joint proposal of Perit Martin Schwirep and Polytechnica Co-op of Florence. Perit Robert Sant, who led the team that won the competition, describes the scheme as a walk through time, the visitor's transposition from today back to 5,000 years ago.
Effettivament, aħna kellna l-issue kif se nittransportaw in-nies minn 2016 għal.
Effectively, the challenge was in how to transpose people from 2016 to 5,000 years ago in quite a restricted space. The architectural style we adopted intended to engage people's imagination, as so they can actually experience this transposition. The style of the interpretation centre is completely distinctive from the surrounding fabric, in order to stimulate questions and the visitor's imagination. To enable this transposition from present to past, through the so-called time machines, which effectively are portals strategically located in the path leading to the temples, the raison d'être of the project.
Time machines li jfremjaw anka xeni li hemm fuq is-sajt biex iwasluk sal-tempju li huwa ultimately l-iktar ħaġa importanti li hemm f'dik l-area.
The design introduces systems and materials that are quite innovative for local architecture to result in a sustainable construction and highly efficient from an environmental point of view, whilst at the same time meeting the practical demands of over 190,000 people who visit this World Heritage Site annually. Therefore, based on universal conservation principles, the scheme has a contemporary style, a reflection of today's architecture and materials, but at the same time respecting and complementing and in no way competing with the importance of the temple itself, which is the core aspect of this project. The site itself is and should always remain the centre of attraction, the fulcrum of the project itself, and the aim of the infrastructure proposed is to ensure that these monuments continue being enjoyed by future generations, whilst being enjoyed in the best possible way. For this reason, at the Tarshin Temple, the need was felt to make two major interventions that would mitigate problems arising following several studies conducted over the years. The first intervention was the construction of a walkway elevated from ground levels, fully reversible, so that visitors would not walk directly on the original ground when entering the temple, whilst also allowing the visitor to walk around the temple perimeter, permitting aerial views of this interesting complex of archaeological remains we have in Malta. These walkways, exceeding more than 600 meters, offered a more complete experience with more impressive views of the remains from new viewing points. In this site, considered to be a World Heritage Site and as established by the Scientific Committee for the Conservation of the Megalithic Temples, there was the need to build a protective shelter, as has been done successfully in other Heritage Malta sites, so as to reduce the damage to the stone and the material contained in the walls and caused by the seasonal wetting and drying cycles and resulting in stone deterioration.
L-għana ewlieni tat-tinda protettiva li saret bħal Tarshin huwa li taqta' barra tnejn mill-elementi.
The reason for the construction of the shelter over the remains at Khal Tarshin is to reduce the adverse effects of two elements, namely the effects of the sun and the rain, since the wetting and drying circles within the megaliths result in the deposition of salt crystals within the pores of the limestone. And once these salt crystals, after many cycles, do not fit in within the pores, these exert pressure on the masonry elements, resulting in its deterioration.
Effett kumulattiv u matul ta' żmien kapaċi anke teqret monument bħal dak li għandna qudiemna hawnhekk.
However, to construct a 2,500 square meter shelter in such a sensitive site, and where any excavation is bound to reveal archaeological remains, is far from easy. This said, besides the difficulty to roof unsupported spans of over 50 meters without central supports,
L-istruttura ovvjament kellha bżonn illi tevita l-vitalijiet arkeoloġiċi.
The structure needed to cover the remains exceeded spans of 50 meters and even 70 meters in certain areas. After analyzing various options, two structural solutions were shortlisted. One included the construction of a lattice shell, resulting in a structure with a fairly flattish profile, with supports placed outside the site, with minimal forces transmitted onto the bedrock. Nonetheless, due to budget restrictions, the second option was selected. This involved a tensile structure anchored to the bedrock.
Is-sistema l-oħra li għażilna hija tinda fejn tiġi ankrata mal-art.
the complex of St. Paul's Catacombs, spread over 10,000 square meters, offered different challenges. First of all, the fact that the catacombs are underground presented a completely different scenario to that of Gigantia or the Tarshin temples. Besides this, the catacomb entrances are scattered on both sides of St. Agatha Street, and therefore the visitor must cross the road at some time during their visit so as to view all the catacombs. It is also important to keep in mind that this site is essentially a cemetery, within which are areas that have never been touched or excavated, and therefore the site must be treated with care and respect so as not to compromise the element of sobriety that characterizes these environments.
L-arkitettura li ġiet iddiżinjata għal katakombi ta' San Pawl.
The proposed structures at St. Paul's Catacombs were constructed of lightweight materials, different to the existing masonry structures in steel and glass. The visitor experience was spread out over the entire 10 tumuli of land on either side of St. Agatha Street. All new structures were designed to be as lightweight as possible, and seemed to float over the site.
Provajna nużaw il-kunċett li il-pis tal-binja tieħu post il-pis tal-ħamrija li kien hemm qabel.
The buildings were therefore designed to appear as if they are floating above ground. Buildings that are quintessentially different from the buildings and entrances to the catacombs that Perit Emanuel Galizia had designed at the end of the 19th century. Given the size of the site, apart from the visitor centre, a number of small pavilions were built and spread over the site, so as to accompany the visitor during their tour. Each pavilion aimed at explaining a different aspect of this unique site, such as that of the burial ritual, the architecture, the archaeology, and discovery of the site, to the conservation project itself, and the legends, stories, and traditions associated with the catacombs, and how they have been utilized over the years. But the main experience must, however, remain that of visiting the catacombs themselves. This created a number of challenges in identifying the solutions for maximum accessibility. These spaces, excavated in rock, featuring a humid, aggressive environment, have narrow passages with low headroom, with an uneven and slippery rock surface. Moreover, since no form of permanent intervention can be effected on the ground, walls or roof, the installation of permanent lighting was also difficult to devise, as no trenches or holes were permissible. Besides this, even the choice of the lighting type had to be particular, since normal light encourages moss and vegetative growths, and other types of biological microorganisms which grow on rock and cover elements such as painting and graffiti that are characteristic all over the catacombs.
The design of the reversible walkways inside the catacombs themselves provided to be challenging. Since the site is quite restricted, the rock-hewn environment is extremely aggressive due to the high humidity levels, and hence the walkways had to be constructed of materials that performed well in such environments. The lighting also required particular attention to ensure that this does not propagate biological growth over the rocky surface.
Due to this, a number of studies and tests were carried out to identify the spectrum of light that does not help the propagation of these species of mosses and lichens. The lighting system was also designed to activate only via sensors, and therefore when there are visitors inside the catacombs. Where physically possible, and due to restrictions of height and width of the passages inside the catacombs, fiberglass walkways were designed and installed in the passages. These served two purposes. First of all, so that the visitor could walk in the catacombs safely, but at the same time conserving and protecting the catacomb floors. Besides this, the structure of these passages offered opportunities to install any services including lighting and together with the interpretation panels required to assist the visitor in his appreciation of his experience. Three sites, different challenges, different solutions. Design processes, innovation, difficulties, archaeological discoveries. The Archaeological Heritage Conservation Project continues. The Archaeological Heritage Conservation Project, the balance between conservation and accessibility, offering a new experience for the visitor, a unique experience. To build a project, one must start at the foundations, and even though a lot of preparation work and studies are carried out, in this type of archaeological site, it is only when the work actually starts that one can be certain that what has been planned on paper can actually be implemented in reality. These projects start from the removal of soil under the guidance and supervision of archaeologists, who follow the guidance and permits issued by the Superintendents of Cultural Heritage. Each site offered different scenarios.
F'kull intervent li jsir partikolarment
In every intervention, particularly on archaeological sites of this importance, works have to be carried out hand in hand with the superintendents of cultural heritage. Basically, every intervention is carried out under their supervision. And as soon as any archaeology is discovered, they are informed. The value of the find is evaluated, and decisions are taken as to how to proceed on site. Eventually, decisions are also taken as to how the intervention designs are adjusted to protect that archaeology.
From this aspect, the project that offered the most challenge was the walkway and protective shelter of Tarshin temples. For the walkways, the solution lay in making precast concrete bases placed on the soil so as to reduce the quantity of material and soil to be removed.
The Tarshin Temple's walkway presented an unusual challenge. The structure had to be as lightweight as possible, and the combined dead and live loads transferred to the foundations required these to be sized in a manner to allow them to be placed directly onto the soil surface, as to not disturb as much as possible the underlying strata.
On the other hand, the shelter required anchors embedded in the rock, in the form of footings. From the contractor's original design to the final proposal, one footing was reduced and the structure required 7 support points. For each of these locations, a fully detailed archaeological excavation was required to expose the bedrock of this prehistoric site. More than once, the design had to be revised so as to finally identify the position of the 7 points where there was least archaeology present, and to use the locations that had already been researched.
Minħabba is-sensitività tal-tempi ta' Tarshin.
Due to the sensitivity of the Tarshin temples, the archaeological excavations at each of the shelter's foundation points were carried out to indicate whether there will be any impact on the archaeology of the site or not. In fact, the excavations did uncover archaeological remains, including megalithic remains belonging to part of the temple. Because of this, the design of the protective shelter had to be revised. In each case, the archaeology dictated the design of the shelter.
It was only after this process that the construction of the shelter itself could start. Piles were dug to a depth of 10 meters inside the rock to serve as anchors for the shelter, covering about 2,500 square meters, which is actually the size of half of a football pitch. The structure was constructed in galvanized steel, while a PTFE canvas was tensioned between the main arches, allowing natural light to filter whilst eliminating UV rays. The Gigantia project involved the construction of a visitor centre in a location 200 metres away from the temples themselves. A series of walkways embedded in the landscape leading to the temple, as also to a small building before one leaves the archaeological park, so as to have the least impact on the site. The methodology of the foundation construction, the walls and all necessary structures, it was ensured that no rock cutting occurs so that this way all the development would be reversible, meaning that the site could be returned back to its original state once any construction would be removed.
Il-pedamenti on site pratikament saru kollha b'mod li kienu iżolati.
The foundations were built in a manner as to render them completely reversible by placing PVC and geotextile over the exposed rock surface, and the actual precast foundation block was then simply placed. In this manner, the works on site were drastically minimized.
While the construction work was being carried out, the interpretation which was to be installed throughout the whole experience was also being developed, so as to accompany the visitor and give explanations of the context and of the temple itself.
Il-ċentru ta' interpretazzjoni offra spazju mhux biss biex
The Interpretation Centre presented us not only with an opportunity to explain the importance of this site, but also offered the ideal context to present a unique display of original artifacts from Gozo's Neolithic site, which means that interpretation does not only focus on the Gigantea temples themselves, but also on other lesser-known sites, which were equally important to us, to help us understand about life in Gozo 5,000 years ago. Without taking anything away from the value and importance of the archaeological site itself, we have attempted, perhaps for the first time, to focus our attention on the daily life of the Neolithic inhabitants, what they looked like, their food, style of dress, the type of illnesses they suffered from, aspects of life, which we can perhaps find it easier to relate to today.
In Gigantea's Interpretation Centre, one meets with a particular person, a prehistoric woman, because for the first time, Heritage Malta, together with forensic scientists, recreated a face of a prehistoric woman. Do you think she could be a relative? The Catacombs site is a very interesting archaeological site, within which we find a 6th century quarry and Punic tombs, as well as an extensive complex of catacombs that were still utilized up to the 8th century AD. Nonetheless, numerous preparatory studies, and with excavations done, the excavation works for the foundations in this site offered new findings.
The excavation of the St. Paul's Catacombs was one full of surprises. What was originally thought of as a catacomb site has now seen its story pushed back by more than 1,000 years. The story started with a quarry, probably from the Phoenician period, into which we later dug a number of Punic tombs that were also used in Roman times and just before the catacombs started being excavated. These gave us a lot of information, including small objects that were buried with the dead, such as dice and pendants in the shape of human heads. In other areas of the site, we also found that the quarry was so extensive that it was shaping the landscape of the areas around the site, such as St. Agatha's and Tacciai.
These findings were turned into opportunities because even though the design had to be modified several times, with the method, these findings were integrated within the building and resulted in exalting the beauty of the site and placing the site and its history firmly as the focal point of the project.
Waqt id-disin tal-proġett tal-Catacombs kien hemm numru ta' diskussjonijiet.
During construction, certain opportunities arose to integrate the archaeological finds within the proposed buildings. These resulted in a number of changes to the designs, in particular in the visitor center, whereby the structure was modified to enable the installation of a glass flooring to expose the underlying finds.
Fuqhom kellhom jiġu modifikati biex juru dawn is-sejbiet. Fosthom il-ċentru tal-viżitaturi fejn intom tistgħu llum taraw art tal-ħġieġ.
In another location, the position of the children's pavilion was changed so as to expose a new catacomb, which was uncovered when removing the soil for the preparation of the foundations for this structure.
Li fuq għazna eżattament konna se nillokaw interpretation pavilion żgħir. Dan kellu jiġi imċaqlaq biex hemmhekk stajna nħallu l-bokka ta' katakomba ġdida li ġiet skoperta mikxufa.
For the site to be least disturbed, the size of the foundations was restricted as much as possible, and the type of construction used also ensured complete reversibility.
Aħna u nagħmlu l-kostruzzjoni ġiet ħadet id-deċiżjoni li jkun hemm linja definita bejn il-kostruzzjoni l-ġdida u s-sit.
During construction, no rock cutting was carried out. The foundations were laid over a layer of plastic, over which the precast concrete foundations were laid. The sizes of the concrete blocks were kept to the absolute minimum, to have the least possible impact on the site and ensure reversibility.
Dawn nżammu l-iżgħar possibbli biex il-footprint tkun ta' l-intervent jibqa' dejjem minimu u reversibbli biex inti matul iż-żmien jekk wieħed irid jarġa' jneħħi kollox ineħħi isib il-lejer tal-plastik u hemmhekk tkun tista' tnaddaf il-blat.
Work inside the catacombs began with extensive restoration. This included cleaning the walls from moss and lichens to uncover the graffiti and decorations that enrich these catacombs. Besides this, restoration work was carried out on the historic plasters found across the walls and roofs. There was also the need for intervention of structural consolidation in parts of the catacombs, as a result of several factors, including natural geology, tree roots, and the natural process of deterioration of the catacombs, extensive damage and risk of collapse.
Il-katakombi nifisom huma strutturi nistgħu nidulhom hekk li huma imħaffrin ġol-blat ġol natura.
Hewn out of the rock, the catacombs themselves may be considered structures in their own right. The nature of the rock varies widely, and there are instances of potential risk of collapse of segments from the walls and roofs. Therefore, we started identifying interventions so as to consolidate and conserve as much as possible the identified areas needing urgent intervention. These interventions included a series of pinning and rock bolting consisting of dowels made of tensile-resistant material that is non-ferrous, and so as to reinforce and retain the integrity of the rock profile, which, as we said, might have been a bit fragile. Other interventions were done in the form of injection grouts behind the rock surface in the areas needing intervention and with the scope of reinforcing the existing rock situation.
Grouts wara l-blat u wara dawk l-areas li kellhom bżonn intervent dejjem bi skop li kemm jista' jkun insaħħu s-sitwazzjoni tal-blat eżistenti.
The last phase of this project involved the installation of lightweight fiberglass walkways and stairs, a material that is not damaged by a humid, aggressive environment, and so as to render these catacombs accessible and contemporaneously install those necessary services to illuminate the spaces and offer fixing points for the interpretation. All this work came to an end on the 2nd of October 2015. The construction was completed and the interpretation installed. In the presence of the responsible ministers and the European Commissioner for Regional Policy, this project officially opened to the public. The Archaeological Heritage Conservation Project. In the 2014 edition of Dinlat Helwa Architectural Heritage Awards, Gigantia's Archaeological Park project won the Prix d'Honneur in the category for large regeneration projects, as well as a silver medal for the best project for 2013.
Esperimentajna b'materjali moderni f'sit ta' wirt dinji.
Ir-rispons għall-pubbliku konferma din l-esperjenza li pruvana nikkreaw.
Ejja ħallaqgħuk mal-antunati tiegħek.
A project which created a unique experience in St. Paul's Catacombs, where today, for the first time in history, the complex has 22 catacombs open to the public.
Sit ġdid tan-nies tar-Rabot u għall-poplu Malti.
Sit li offra challenges u opportunitajiet uniċi.
Arkitettura li tirrispetta sit arkeoloġiku.
A project that will protect another World Heritage Temple for future generations.
Dan huwa t-tielet sit motti biex jiġi protett u allura nħoss li qed nimxu l-qudiem.
Il-valur tas-sit jiddetta l-proġett.
Qed niżguraw il-konservazzjoni tas-sit għall-ġenerazzjonijiet li ġejjin.
A project with different meanings, with different purposes.
Assikurazzjoni ta' tgawdija fil-preżent u fil-futur.
Nieħdu ħsieb dawn is-siti fis-sem il-komunità dinjija.
Żwieġ bej intervent ta' arkitettura u struttura u konservazzjoni.
Viżjoni ambizjuża li llum saret realtà.
Il-Missjoni ta' Heritage Malta imsarfa fil-prattika.
By means of this Heritage Archaeological Conservation Project, Heritage Malta injected a new lease of life in these three sites. A conservation project, but also a project which created a unique experience for these unique sites. Heritage Malta looks forward to other projects so that the heritage assets entrusted to it are conserved, preserved and appreciated whilst made accessible to all. Heritage Malta is there to give a future to our past.